Every single card in Clash Royale has its biggest hater. For me, I hate some cards because they hard counter my deck, which is fair enough. And I also hate some other cards because they are outright unfun to go against and piss me off. But would I delete a card just because I don't like facing it? Well, of course not. Instead, I would delete cards that I feel add nothing but problems to the game. First card, Tornado. I've been openly anti-Nado since like 2018 and there are multiple reasons for that.
That's quite big.
First of all, it's the most broken get out of jail card I've seen in any video game I've played in my life. For example, let's say I'm a dumb moron that fireball, arrows, zapped, and executioner. In normal circumstances, his Hog Rider would be able to get multiple hits on my tower because I had to deploy my troops very late due to the dumb play that I did. If I had Tornado, I would take 0 damage because it's a spell, so deploying it late doesn't change much interactions. Don't get me wrong, this isn't exclusive to Tornado as majority of the spells get their damage instantly. But oftentimes, the trade-off is that troops are cheaper, deal more damage over time, and can give you some counter push potential. In the case of Tornado, this card is 3 elixir and is essentially fully countering a Hog Rider on its own. And this isn't exclusive to your offensive cards, as on defense they can still pull your stuff into a push. Like this Nado did the job of a rocket for 3 elixir. This is about as broken as Void fully countering a balloon if nothing was tanking for it. Except that unlike Void, where you can stack troops to block it, you usually can't do anything about Tornado. The most unfair example is something like balloon cycle decks, where you can literally be up so much elixir and protect their building and anti-air card and they would still get away with it using Tornado and not even get a death damage on their tower. Oh, and did that just activate the King Tower? You bet your sweet ass it did. Having a player with 3 towers while the other player has 2 towers is literally unfair. I'm not suggesting we get rid of King activations because having a Firecracker activate the King as a downside is fair. When the King activation is something from your opponent's deck, it gives them some risk versus reward choice when building their deck. And oftentimes, it forces you to give up some damage in exchange of that 3rd tower advantage. With Tornado, not only can you activate the King Tower with no downsides like damage on your towers, but also you can activate the King Tower with half the cards that exist in the game, which is outrageous. For fuck's sake, it took me like 23 minutes to show all of them on a video. One could argue that the damage on the King Tower is a price that you are paying, but is it really? The tiebreaker in the game reduces the HP of all towers at the same time, meaning only your lowest HP tower is at risk. The King Tower is a 7k HP sponge that can eat up so much damage, which means it's a resource that you can only utilize if you are using Tornado in your deck. On offense, it's equally broken as it makes playing any card on your side of the arena risky. You would have to be on your toes the whole time predicting with cheap cards given your deck has some, or using a building to prevent cards like Magic Archer from lining up on your tower, again given you use buildings. It's also stupidly broken with air cards because if you're deploying anything on top of them, they can just Nado it away, which means this E-drag is unkillable for some decks. Or Nado it closer to the tower, nullifying your entire positioning game for free splash damage on the towers. Its synergy with spells is also insanely broken because not only can it clump up everything together, but if you play a spell like a rocket for tower damage and they coincidentally play something a bit far away from it, you can pull it in to kill it. The amount of times I've seen things get pulled into a log range in top games is extremely disgusting. Literally no other card in the game has the ability to take advantage of an already placed spell. It's not even just spells because things like Evo Tesla's Shockwave and Giant Skeleton's death damage can abuse that as well. And to make things worse, it synergizes with some bad cards that prevents the devs from freely buffing them. We all know Wizard is a horrible card on his own and low-key broken with Tornado, so we can't really buff him, can we? Second card, Fisherman. This guy is kind of like a weaker multi-use Tornado given how he gets King Tower activations and how he invalidates the opponent's positions completely. The only reason people sleep on him is because he is garbage against cycle decks, which is what most of the top players use. And also because he is less broken than Tornado, given that he is a troop, not a spell, so you can interfere with him. But every single time there is a beatdown meta, Fisherman becomes a top 10 cards automatically without any buffs. And honestly, it makes sense because despite it being 3 elixir, he feels like he's worth 5 elixir against beatdown pushes, I genuinely think lightning on him is worth it. Like, keeping a fisherman alive in the middle at triple elixir will just make it impossible to push from any side, because the dude will just pull your tank and slowly start pulling your support troops one by one after it. But then you look at him in a cycle matchup and he's basically a worse knight with less HP and less damage. Sure, he has some quirks that allows him to pull things you don't want him to pull. Hey, being this broken on defense against expensive cards allows you to play anything in the back with zero consequences. The whole meta of P.E.K.K.A. Goblin Giant was possible because of how Fisherman allows you to get away with the dumbest stuff unpunished. And the fact that his hook freezes troops while they're getting pulled makes an X factor in a lot of matchups where you won off of one hook. Besides that, isolating cards on your side wins you bridge fights because your tower would be helping, plus you can easily surround enemy troops with swarm cards and have them get damaged by both Princess Towers at the same time. And obviously he has that King activation factor in case that all wasn't broken enough for you. Unlike Tornado, he can do it without taking damage on your towers, and it doesn't work on all the cards, but it's still something. Third card, Freeze. This is one of the few niche spells that you really only see in 1 or 2 off-meta decks that you would barely even face. The whole problem with it is that it's 4 elixir and doesn't even kill spear goblins, so the damage is trash. Obviously you're playing it for the freeze effect itself, but that's usually not worth it as it's a very big overcommitment given that the frozen troops can still distract your cards. And building targeting troops while the most effective candidate for freeze, they still don't really cut it in my opinion. Let's say you went Balloon and they played Inferno Dragon, so you freeze. Normally, they would go for a second response, which is usually cheaper than freeze itself. If you pause in this situation, you wasted 9 elixir and they kept their troops for a counter push, meaning you wasted 9 elixir on a balloon death damage. So realistically, you should only freeze if you have a big push that can clean up all the troops you froze, which means oftentimes you can't really use it effectively in single elixir and are better off waiting for double and triple elixir. The only time it would be viable in single elixir is when you use it for the first time to catch people off guard, which means that for at least the first 2 minutes of the game, this card will sit like a dead duck in your hand. The whole problem with this card lies in how broken it gets in sudden death, because no matter how stupidly you overcommit, you're going to get away with it, because the game will end with you taking a tower. One cannot simply get punished with a counter push if the game is over. And I feel like defense is where things get even worse, as the card is just inherently defensive in its nature. Unlike an offensive freeze, a defensive one gets played reactively on the opponent's own arena, which oftentimes make it near impossible to break through, as you would need a response for their response. Using a troop might feel cheaper and better, but it wouldn't work because of how much time it takes for them to walk there to be able to help. So trying to break through a freeze player with a regular push is just extremely toxic and frustrating. I'd argue that might be even unhealthy for the game if the card wasn't barely getting used, especially the classic freeze when 5 seconds is left. Fourth card, Goblin Curse. This card is, I think, one of the most misunderstood cards in the entire game. Around a month after its release, I kind of understood the point of it, and the design behind it is almost genius. Imagine you start a match and they Goblin Gang on the bridge, which you normally would log for a +1 trade. With Goblin Curse, you have the chance to curse and log for a -1 trade. But is it really a -1 trade when you get 6 stab goblins for 1 elixir, considering 4 of them cost 2 elixir? Now those 6 stab goblins will either do a crap ton of damage on your opponent's tower or force out extra elixir, making this a completely positive trade for you. And this was confirmed somewhat recently by one of the Clash Royale artists on Twitter.
Can we still call it that?
I'm still gonna call it that.
You know, I think I kind of prefer X.
You might be thinking, why is this card included here if I just said the design of it was genius? Which might sound hypocritical. The main problem I have with this card is how it auto-wins games when played on towers. This mechanic it has encourages people to not play it throughout the entire match and instead just save it because the surprise factor is very valuable to be wasted like that. For example, I have this match that I played where I barely did any mistakes and was always ahead of my opponent. It looked like I was winning the game given I was ahead in damage and he barely scratched my tower, until he revealed this piece of garbage of a card. And bro had the audacity to emote after that. Like, do you want a well played? The problem is that this was basically unavoidable because he literally never played the Goblin Curse a single time since the start of the match, and it auto-won him the game. And this goes against the intended design for it to be a support spell for other spells, which is a really cool concept in my opinion. It's so cool that I think instead of deleting the card, it should be changed so that it cannot be played on the deeper side of the enemy's arena. I know this is a huge nerf, but I think it could allow them to buff the spell itself rather than keeping it underwhelming on purpose because it's a disastrous card to have in the meta. Like right now it's not a horrible card by any means, but it's just mid. I just don't know. But if they make it limited in where it can be deployed while buffing, let's say, its damage amplification percentage, I think it could pair up better with stuff like Zap, while also giving the opponent some outplay potential by keeping their cards protected behind their tower and making it a more interactive card. Fifth card, Clone. This card is kind of like Freeze, where it's considered very gimmicky and weird. It holds the same effect of being a surprise factor based card, so it's way stronger when played for the first time in any game. But the problem is, it's way more gimmicky than Freeze, which is an already very high bar for a card to reach. It's nearly useless on defense because it stuns your troops slightly and pushes them closer towards the danger. Its effects are also very easy to counteract, where one spell could just wipe out the whole effect entirely. Or very hard, actually near impossible to counter if you don't have spells, because troops can melt easily here. This insane design of having cards stay at 1 HP but retain full power makes it more unhealthy and polarizing than Freeze. It also causes it to be more broken with some cards due to the effects they possess, like bats and skeletons are already borderline at 1 HP anyway. Giant skeletons' value comes from the death bomb, which you can get the full damage on it with just a clone, and I feel like some interactions like this would make buffing some cards dangerous because of how broken they would be when doubled. The card itself is weak, but you can't really buff it because it already works super well in some niche situations, so you gotta either rework it or it will just stay as a dead bottom tier card. Maybe it should though. Sixth card, Elixir Pump. This card is a very interesting take because on paper it feels like it's a very healthy risk versus reward design. Playing it will risk you being down 6 elixir, so you could get punished really hard and not only lose the game, but you might end up even losing the elixir pump itself, which basically is a game over at this point. But if you end up defending well, you will get rewarded with 2 extra elixir, because the pump gives back 8 elixir. However, this card is extremely unhealthy in general and should have never been added to the game. Clash Royale is inherently a defensive game, which is why you usually see top players play no cards at the start of the game. Generally speaking, the player that plays the card second has slightly better chances at winning most of the times. But this sort of changes when Pump comes into play, because yeah, he played the card first, but did he really? Now I'm forced to make the first move, which basically would just put me in a big disadvantage on top of the disadvantage of not having a pump on my own side. I am aware Pump doesn't appear in starting hands, but there are many times in a game where you and your opponent would have to reset and save up elixir. I could technically spell it out if I was lucky enough to have a spell in my hand, but spells are like the only good counterplay against Pump, and even they aren't just that good because it's a negative elixir trade, but you get some nice crown tower damage on the side that you don't care about getting damage on. Yay. Some spells like Rocket can't even reach both the pump and the tower, so it ends up being a net -1 elixir trade with 0 crown tower damage to compensate. People quickly realized that pump forces people to spell it out under any circumstances, so they started abusing that by pairing it with some heavy spell bait cards like 3 Musketeers. This created a pick your poison kind of situation. Or did it? Dude, what the f, man? And obviously if you don't have a big spell, you are drinking both poisons, so have fun with that. 7th card, Mirror. I genuinely don't think there is a single case where I wanted to play the same card twice in a row other than if I was like trolling or something. Because when you think about it, Giant Double Prince and Giant Double Prince are just not equal. Having 2 Dark Princes instead of 2 different princes can make your push really bad against tanks like P.E.K.K.A, because both Dark Princes have lower damage, whereas having variety of choices allow the Prince brothers to cover up more counters overall, making them way more threatening. This really goes for everything from swarm to spells to whatever, since the core game really does punish spamming similar troops. You could make a case where you would deploy a mirror after the first card gets countered, since the spell is out of rotation now, but a lot of the time you would have to respond to some other cards on the opposite side, which would just overwrite your mirror, and a Goblin Barrel for 4 elixir is nearly never worth it. Even with the extra levels. Not only is the card just sitting dead and purposeless, but also its only contribution to the game is to just allow people to spam broken cards multiple times in a row, with one of them being higher level. We have seen this with Goblin Machine on launch, Night Witch on launch, Phoenix on launch. I genuinely believe Mirror does zero good for the game. Like, at least Clone makes some goofy strategies and adds something to the game, but Mirror literally just promotes brainless spam whenever there is a mistake in balancing. 8th card, Graveyard. This might upset a few people, but I don't care. This card just doesn't fit in this game, and that's an objective truth. The problem I have with this card is regarding the RNG, because I don't know how it would make sense for a poison on a graveyard to fully counter it one time, and then the other time you play it, it would get like a couple of hundred damage on their tower just because the skeletons felt like spawning right beside the Princess Tower. The beauty in this game comes from the fact that every interaction is predictable. We can keep doing the same thing over and over and we will never get different results. Except for Graveyard. This card can spawn most of the skeletons on one side the first time, and then the next time most of them would spawn on the other side without any indicator, and basically take out like half the tower. Usually every win condition in the game would need like 2 or 3 cards that would help it get consistent damage on towers. And this goes true for every single one of them, except Graveyard. Since it's extremely random, if you play it enough times and pray, you are bound to get some damage somehow. The only thing needed is something tanking for the tower, which about every card in the game can do. So Graveyard decks are usually just 6 cards that are 100% defense based, which allows them to have the most broken defense ever imaginable. And then their attack is just Graveyard with poison added on top of it in double elixir, because realistically, why would you need to support it more if it will eventually get some damage if you spam it enough times? So yeah, I think these genuinely need to be deleted from the game. Except for Goblin Curse, I think it has potential to be a healthy card with the rework I suggested. Not entirely sure though. Initially, this video was planned to be only about Tornado, but I realized Fisherman can't get away with his crap, and later decided to add in more cards because who doesn't like pissing off a bunch of people on the internet, my dudes?